The last global event has ended, which means that we now have access to all 14 classified gear sets, which means that it is time to do another one of those gear set tier list videos. If you don't know what this is basically me ranking all the different gear sets in the game, talking about how good or how bad I think they are, and then put them, as the title suggests, in a tier list. We have tier 1 to tier 4, with tier 1 being the best and tier 4 being the worst. For those that don't really care about what I have to say about each and every one of these gear sets, I've got the complete overview for you here. Do keep in mind though that this is a tier list made for PvP, so while gear sets like Sentry, Alpha Bridge or FireCrest, they might be situationally very strong, in PvE, their use in PvP is fairly limited. That doesn't mean that these gear sets are useless. It just means that, generally speaking, you're going to be better off going with a tier 1 or tier 2 gear set, because the chances are that those sets will be more useful more often in more situations. This list is also, of course, completely opinion-based. It is my opinion. This is not necessarily a fact. So if you're wondering why X or Y gear set isn't lower or higher on the list, well, don't worry, because I'm going to go over all of that in this video. That's basically this whole video. In fact, here are the timestamps for all the different gear sets. You can also find these in the description box down below, so you can just skip forward to the gear set that you're using or that you want to hear me ramble about for some reason. And that's basically how this video is going to work. So yeah, with that all being said, let's start this video off with Strikers. Striker is easily one of the most powerful sets this patch. Not only does it give you up to 100% extra damage through the stacks, but it also provides the player with a pretty strong passive heal. You know, if you have 100% stacks, this passive heal is a lot stronger than even the Nomad healing, and that's going to help you out a lot in those drawn-out fights. There has been quite some discussion among the players on whether the 6-piece Striker should give you healing or no healing, or if the healing is too strong or too weak. Because, you know, it's always been a DPS gear set, why does it suddenly have healing? A lot of players don't think this is very balanced, but I don't think that the healing is the feature that truly makes or breaks this set. The way I see it, the true strength of the 6-piece comes from how easy it is to gain stacks compared to the 4-piece. With the 4-piece, you would lose 2 stacks for missing a single bullet and then only gaining 1 stack for hitting a bullet. But with the 6-piece, this is swapped around, so you gain 2 stacks for hitting 1 bullet and then you only lose 1 stack for missing. So if you only hit 33% of your shots, you should still be on equal stacks, so to speak. And this makes it very, very easy to stack up very fast, even from a distance. It definitely isn't a strange thing that you start a fight already being on 80% stacks, which then gives you both a very strong heal over time, but also a crazy amount of damage, enough to burst down pretty much anyone and even go face to face with Nomad players. Because yes, with the classified gear there has definitely been some power creep, but 100% extra damage and a passive healing on top of that, that is pretty strong. So yeah, it isn't hard to see why Strikers is so popular at the moment. It's my favorite gear set as well when playing alone. Next up, we have Sentry, and Sentry isn't all that glorious. Unfortunately, the Sentry 6-piece is disabled in PvP, so running with a 6-piece Sentry is kind of useless, to be honest with you. I've tried out something with the 5-piece Sentry with Vigorous, and then run it with the Devil and the Heal with a ton of accuracy to see if I can get stacks on people during fights to see if it's worth it, but ultimately it's just a subpar gear set for PvP, no matter in what way you would build it. In the past we also had some Sentry builds with pistols and shields, and that would be somewhat useful as well. The problem is though is that shields got a big nerf this patch, and they die super fast unless you're playing defense. So something like that is also not possible anymore. If you want a spammy sniper build, if you want to spam sniper shots from a semi-automatic sniper, then Deadeye is simply far better in almost every situation. Not to mention that it's far easier to use because you have to hit body shots instead of headshots. And if you're looking for a sniper build that focuses more on precision shots and, you know, headshots and that kind of stuff, then Hunter's Fate will be the way to go. Hunter's Fate is way better than Sentry in that situation. I think that something has to be done to the 6-piece bonus for PvP before I can really ever recommend anyone picking this up. It doesn't mean that it's not good for PvE. In fact, Sentry is very good for PvE, one of the best sets to go with. But again, this is a PvP tier list video, so we're only gonna look at the PvP side of things. Tactician's Authority is something that I've used a lot in the past, especially for the healer builds that I ran with, and I think that the changes to the 4-piece, along with the new 6-piece, kinda made the gear set a little bit worse. Sure, the 6-piece allows you to get up to 60% extra skill power instead of 30%. But to even get there, it first requires you to use a skill at 30% stacks and then stack all the way up to 60% and only use the other skill. You have to use your skills in a certain order to get the most out of this gear set. And I believe that this actually leads you to use your skills less often because you don't want to screw up your skill combo, so to speak. And it also means that you're going to have to spend a lot more time actually shooting your gun in between using skills in order to gain stacks. Because remember, the 4-piece has also been changed and gaining stacks has been changed as well. Teammates cannot give you stacks anymore. It has to be you who's shooting the gun, you alone. And then maybe the turret skill if you want to use that. And because of this, you'll be using your skills less and less. And with a skill-based build, where everything is about skill power, this is not really a good thing. You don't want to use your skills less, you want to spam those skills, whether that's heals, whether that's a sticky bomb, whether that's whatever. You want to use it as often as possible. And the extra 30% skill power that you get with the second rotation if you use your skills in the right order, I just don't think it's worth it. I also think that the 5-piece is a little bit weak. It only gives you 5% skill haste and 5% skill power. I assume that the reason for this is to compensate for the 15% skill haste that the 2-piece gives you. I've always said that this is just a bit too strong. I think Massive agrees with this, but I think they didn't want to nerf it. Instead, they're just compensating for it with the 5-piece being relatively weak. But this means that it's probably way more efficient to run the old 4-piece Tactician with Vigorous and an inventive backpack most of the time. And that build, it's still strong, but it's not as strong as other healer builds, but we'll get there when I'm going to talk about Reclaimer. That's why Tactician's Authority is currently tier 3 for me. Nomad is another very strong gear set in PvP, but not because it's so good at killing people, but more because it's just so good at not dying. Through the 6-piece bonus that you get with all the damage resilience, you should be able to win about every phase trait in the game, except for maybe a striker player that's sitting on 100% stacks. And if other players actually want to kill you, they would first have to proc that bonus, then they have to run away for about 10 seconds, and only then they can continue fighting. That's basically the only way to beat a Nomad, because if you fight a Nomad during the 10 seconds that they have the bonus active, you're always going to lose because they're going to sit on 60% all damage resilience. And there's of course also the chance that the other user is going to have to do this twice or 3 times or sometimes even 4 times in a row. Which means it makes it very, very difficult to kill a Nomad or to even fight a Nomad for that matter. And it is for this reason that Nomad is very, very good for solo players who, for example, get caught out by surprise. It gives them a far easier time to get out of harm's way. But it's also a very good set to use versus other teams of Rogue. Let's say you're in the Dark Zone, you see your group of manhunts. If you and then a lot of other players on that server are Nomad as well, it's going to give the Rogue team a very, very difficult time. Because the only way that Rogues or manhunts can fight the entire server, so to speak, is when the enemies come in rolling one by one or few by few. They take out 3 here, they take out 4 there, and that's how they can fight off the entire server. That's usually how things are done, but with the Nomads, you kind of take that away from the manhunts, because they can't simply burst you down. Even if they have really good aim, they just cannot confirm the kills, because you just go in there, you proc the bonus, you run around them for 10 seconds, and you're just wasting their time, so to speak. Whether you're doing damage or not, it doesn't really matter. Now, if you do that, and if 4 other players do that as well, and then 4 other players join the fight because they can't kill you, the manhunts are just simply going to get overwhelmed due to a sheer numbers disadvantage. And then all that little damage that all the Nomad players combined are doing, that's going to be enough to kill the Rogue players. The only downside to Nomad is that, again, it doesn't have a lot of kill potential. If you just play the DZ to go manhunt yourself or to go manhunt with your squad, you'll often find that if you run with Nomad or if you have a teammate running with Nomad, your squad lacks a lot of damage that is required to burst down those players fast enough. Because if you're fighting 10 people, you're going to need to have enough burst damage to kill people before they can heal up or get revived, etc, etc, etc. You need to confirm those kills. And this is why I think that for squad play, or even for soloing the DZ for just rogue play, Nomad is not the best set. The set is just really, really good at shutting down rogues and manhunts, because they can't kill you. So again, you just run around them, you waste their time until more people eventually show up, and then you can just kill them. And of course, you know, if you don't want to deal with PvP, this is a very good gear set as well if you don't want to get killed. So for those reasons, Nomad is definitely a tier 1 gear set. Final Measure is also a tier 1 gear set in my opinion. This gear set went through so many changes lately. First, the bugs were removed that caused the set to defuse friendly grenades. That's of course a very good start. Then the 6-piece was introduced, and it gave the whole squad 15% more damage, armor, or skill power depending on what type of grenade the user would defuse, which was already really strong in and of itself, at least in my opinion. Then, somewhat later, that value got buffed to 20% and now 40% out of nowhere. So yeah, right now if you defuse a frag grenade, the whole squad gets a 40% damage buff. This is incredibly strong in my opinion, because with Rogue 2.0, everybody is of course able to spam those grenades a lot more without the fear of going rogue themselves, because they can't hit friendlies anymore with their grenades. And a lot of people are taking full advantage of this. I will say that the grenade cooldown was increased to 6 seconds instead of 3. So that helps to fight the spam a little bit. I think this was a very good change. But the grenade spam is still a very real thing, especially when you have 7, 8, 9 people up against you. And Final Measure basically takes this nade spam away from other players. Because yes, they can still spam grenades. And if they throw 2 or 3 grenades in a row, you're still gonna get staggered and that kind of stuff. But Final Measure helps a lot to mitigate that. And as soon as a grenade is defused, your whole squad basically gets a damage buff that's almost equal to a tech link. And I think that being staggered for a free tech link like that, I mean, that's definitely worth it for me. I think this is really, really powerful to have. Final Measure forces the opponents to change their playstyle. It forces them to use their guns only to confirm those kills. And if they don't, if they try to use grenades, if they try to spam nades, they're going to be punished very, very hard. And this is also very good when you're fighting the entire server as a manhunt squad, because no matter how many grenades you defuse, there will always be that one guy that keeps respawning, keeps grabbing more nades, and then tossing more nades back at your squad instead of shooting his gun. And then, off of just that one guy, the whole squad gets a 40% damage buff, and we can use that to kill other players, even if those players aren't using grenades. This is very, very frustrating to play against, because bad players can literally screw it up for the good player, so to speak. On top of that, Final Measure also comes with a lot of exotic damage resilience as a base, which reduces the damage from grenades, but also reduces the damage from things like Predator's Mark Bleed, which makes the Final Measure user quite a bit more tanky actually. It really helps out a lot, and it again enforces the idea that enemies have to land bullets to confirm kills, because you can't just kill the healer with a bleed. It doesn't work because he has all that exotic damage resilience. That's why we run the Final Measure as a healer, because it can be a really squishy healer, but then the exotic damage resilience and the grenade diffuse feature still add that extra layer of protection that, for example, the Reclaimer does not have. Lone Star is the highest burst and sustained damage gear set in the game for PvP, if you build it right at least. The amount of raw bullet damage that this set can push out, especially with the Berserker buff, is simply unmatched, with maybe Deadeye as the exception to the rule. The LMGs that you're supposed to use with this gear set also have a lot of accuracy and are still really strong at range. Stronger than the assault rifle or the SMG, for example, so it isn't a strange thing to burst people down that are maybe 20, 25 or 30 meters away from you, and a lot of people just don't expect that. They walk up to you in the open at that range and they just expect you to not be able to hit them, but the LMGs, they just burst them down. So if this set is so good, then why is this set at tier 2? Well, first up, the build does not have any kind of sustain like, for example, Striker has. And generally speaking, when you're playing Lone Star, you're quite squishy. You kind of have to be at the back of your team and let someone else of the team take the damage while you get use out of the set, because of course with the Berserker gear set you're going to have to fire a lot of bullets in a row. So you're gonna have to be standing still or walking slowly to the left or the right for a very long time. If you're up front, this is not gonna work because you're gonna get bursted down. And being at the back like that is simply not always possible unless you have a very strong front line, for example like a D3 player with 2 healers. This is something we sometimes run as well, but it basically means that unless you can protect a Lone Star player, the Lone Star build just doesn't really work as well as Strikers in a group composition. The set also comes with a little bit of RNG. You don't always get the buff at the end of a magazine, the Berserker buff. There's only a 75% chance, and this means that there will be situations where you just can't seem to proc that buff when you really, really need it. Like there's all these players in front of you and bam, I'm not getting the Berserker buff, right? And if you are the main damage dealer in the squad, because you already have a strong front line, you already have 2 healers, this means that you're lacking a lot of damage, and it means that you cannot confirm the kills and that you will be overwhelmed. All the stuff I talked about with the Nomad. The set is very, very, very powerful, but it needs a lot of babysitting to work, and it is a bit inconsistent at times. That's why I put it on tier 2. And then we get the Predator's Mark, which is the gear set that you probably all expected me to put on tier 1, or even a tier above that, the God tier section, specifically made for Predator's Mark. But no, not really. I don't think that Predator's Mark deserves to be on tier 1 in this list. Predator's Mark is simply not that good for solo play because you don't have a lot of burst damage and the only sustained damage is through the bleed. The Predator's Mark is not that good when you're in a group and you're going up against a server because you're gonna lack the burst damage you need to plow through all those players, and if you're playing against so many different players, it can sometimes actually be pretty hard to land 10 bullets on the same guy without all the other players running in front of him, right? So you're gonna lose out on a lot of damage. And Predator's Mark is also not that good versus organized groups either, because if they know how to play properly against the bleed is almost going to do nothing. So why is everybody so upset with Predator's Mark? Well, I think because the gear set is pretty cheesy. If you have two top players, the top 1% players, or two top teams going up against each other, the one with the Predator's Mark will probably lose most of the time, because properly playing against the bleed, it's possible. It's very possible. You can actually counter the bleed in many different ways. The problem is that it's a lot easier to use the Predator's Mark than that it is to play against it. Predator's Mark is a way for bad or mediocre players to confirm kills versus players that they otherwise would have never been able to kill. Versus the top 1% or whatever players you want to call it. I'm not saying the division is competitive, but you know what I'm talking about. For the top 1%, the Predator's Mark builds are probably still not going to be that effective. Because good players will know how to play around it, they will know how to counter it, and they will pretty much kill the Predator's Mark with their Nomads or their Strikers, so to speak. But for the 99% of the player base that remains, it is actually really difficult to play against it, because those players don't know the game inside out, and it's just going to result in frustrating deaths for them that are going to feel cheesy and undeserved. Like, god damn it, I died to that stupid bleed again. That's how it's going to feel. It is very easy for newer players or bad players to have an impact on the fight through the bleed without having good aim, good timing, or game knowledge. And the other player that needs to play around the bleed, he does need that aim, he does need the timing or the game knowledge. And just for a very large portion of the player base, this Predator's Mark gear set feels very oppressive. It feels unbalanced, it feels as it's completely overpowered, but in reality, it's just cheesy, which is why it doesn't belong on tier 1, but just on tier 2. Hunter's Fate got a complete rework, which in my opinion puts the set right next to Predator's Mark and Lone Star, also on tier 2. This set is basically a striker set for bolt action snipers, but then without the healing, and then the stacks are also a lot easier to lose. So yeah, that's really all there is to it. The 100% extra damage that you can potentially get from this set, that's still really strong. It does put it in a place where it's going to be possible to one-shot people. But seeing how snipers are, generally speaking, not that powerful in the division due to their inaccuracy when it comes down to aiming and moving at the same time, and due to the fact that a lot of builds can be very tanky right now, and thus a lot of players will be able to move closer to you without getting sniped down, I just don't think that any sniper build is deserving of top tier because of the way that the game works, basically. It's not that the set is weak. Sure, if you compare it to Striker, it's basically like Striker, but Striker has healing. Striker stacks don't go away after 10 seconds or after reloading. But still, the snipers themselves also just come with a lot of downsides, especially the bolt action snipers, because, you know, first up, you're gonna have to land those headshots to do any damage, and even if you land those headshots, the bolt action snipers, they have one of the lowest sustained damage outputs in the entire game. Yeah, of course, you can get a few kills shooting from the back, you can get a few sniper kills that look cool for your montage or something, but as a manhunt team or just for true PvP in general, you usually want to keep pushing with your team and plow through people as fast as possible as soon as they respawn, basically, so that you're not fighting everybody at the same time. And assault rifles, SMGs, LMGs, those kind of weapons are just better for that. And the sniper, especially the bolt action snipers, they just don't have that same kind of impact. I just feel that, you know, good groups, they will always move away to an underground section or to some close quarter area immediately if they notice that there's a sniper fighting them. And if there's not that many players around and you start sniping at someone, good players will just instantly push on you while they move to the left and the right and heal each other up, and it basically makes it impossible to land those shots and actually kill one of them. It sounds like I'm bashing Hunter's Fate right now, but I'm not doing that. Hunter's Fate is still a good set, it's still tier 2. I just wanted to give you the reasons as to why I think this set isn't tier 1 just like Strikers. Because, yeah, I know the damage is insane, but the set does have a few downsides. That's what I wanted to mention. Deadeye is up next. I thought it would be smart to put this together with the Hunter's Fate so that we talked about all the sniper sets right away and can leave that behind us. I think that Deadeye is still very undervalued this patch. I think it's still very strong. It's unfortunate that it comes with such a situational 6-piece. I don't think the 6-piece is very strong. It would have been nice if the extra crit damage started counting up the moment that you land a headshot, not get a headshot kill. I think if it was just a headshot, it would have been worth running with a 6-piece. But for now, 6-piece isn't worth it, so I'd say run Deadeye with a vigorous chest piece. And yes, you heard me right, vigorous chest piece, not reckless. I think the one-shot era with Deadeye is gone with the changes to stamina. You know, everybody's running Nomad or 9k stamina with the Predator. And Deadeye was once strong enough to one-shot people, but right now, it's not going to be strong enough anymore. And even if it is, it's not going to be that useful to you. So the way I would build Deadeye is not as all-in anymore. I wouldn't build it as just a glass cannon. Maybe go 5k stamina, vigorous, get an SVD, then get a house as your secondary weapon, because that also works very well with the crit. And then just use the SVD to mow down people running up to you, because yes, it still hits very hard. But then as soon as people come a bit closer, you can just swap to the SMG, and then in combination with the vigorous and the overhealing that you get from the teammates, you should still be able to hit back pretty hard. That's basically how I would play the Deadeye right now. Now, the only reason why this gear set is in tier 1 is because it can be really difficult to get value out of the set at times, because you have to be in cover in order to get the 100% crit chance. And scoped in, by the way. Now, this is oftentimes possible, but there's also going to be some situations where this is not possible. And then, you know, if you're the main damage dealer on the team, you're going to lose out a lot of damage, and it's very easy to get overwhelmed with, again, a lot of nomads just running in between you. The stuff I talked about earlier. So yeah, that's basically why this gear set is tier 2 and not tier 1. Reclaimer is pretty much the core of any 4-man squad as far as I can see it. With the changes to stamina in patch 1.8, everybody received a lot more health as a base, and because everybody is speccing into stamina, everybody has a lot more health in general. It's not weird to see people running around with 300 or 400,000 health just on their build. But then the skills, such as the first aid and the support station, they did not change in terms of healing output. Which means that going into patch 1.8, everybody got a lot more health, but the healing skills, they didn't give you more health back. So the healing skills got a pretty big indirect nerf. It's far more difficult to heal everybody back up now than it was compared to patch 1.7. In patch 1.7 you could shoot a defibrillator at somebody that had vigorous, and he would go from 0 health to full overheal. Right now that's not the case anymore. You drop a heal on somebody, maybe he's going to get back 2 bars of his health, maybe not. So yeah, this almost made healer builds fall off in the meta. If it wasn't for the 6-piece Reclaimer, which drops a 100% support station healing speed multiplier on top of the box, which more than compensates for the indirect nerfs. So in short, every skill build, every healer build in the game, they all got a lot weaker relatively, except for the Reclaimer. Reclaimer actually got a lot stronger, and the sustained healing that the support station outputs as a result is pretty much unmatched with anything else. Even with the Tactician stacks, even with 600,000 skill power, you can't even get close to what the average Reclaimer station can heal. On top of that, it's also very good that you have no cooldown on the support station when it gets destroyed, so people can't just shoot it down to get rid of it. This means that they're going to be forced to run with an EMP sticky bomb, which is then one less conceal pulse or one less booster shot for them. And even when the support station gets EMP'd, there are ways for the Reclaimer to work around this, as I've talked about in my how to support station video. Even if the enemies know how to counter a support station, it usually still puts a lot of pressure on them, because they have to keep it in mind all the time. They basically have to treat the box like a whole extra player, because if you don't EMP that shit right away, you're going to have a very hard time winning that fight. It just does too much for the team to ignore. And for that reason, Reclaimer is the best healer build for PvP. And I think when you're playing squads, especially when you're fighting against a server, Reclaimer is just so key to survival. Alpha Bridge is the second gear set on the list that made it into tier 4. So yeah, let's go over why this is, because at first glance, being able to get a mini version of a random ult every time you get a kill, that sounds very strong. And yeah, it is pretty strong, but it's only strong for PvE, because I am generally not a big fan of the on-kill mechanics for PvP, because to get use out of those, it means that you already killed the player that you're trying to kill, and thus you probably don't need to buff anymore. It might be useful at times when you're fighting multiple players. You know, you can perhaps get a tech link or a survivor link off of the first player, and then use that survivor link or the tech link to fight the second player. But remember that outside of the 15% all weapon damage and the extra talent that you get with the Alpha Bridge 4-piece, Alpha Bridge has nothing. So if you're able to get a kill on a player with just that gear set, you probably would have had a much easier time getting that same kill when you're running with a Nomad or a Striker build. And if there are other people around, trust me, I'd rather sit on 100% Striker stacks than having a tech link for 5 seconds or a recovery link for 5 seconds. Alpha Bridge also takes away the manual use of the signature skill, which means that you cannot ult your teammates anymore. You cannot get ulted by teammates anymore, so running this within a squad is definitely not the best thing to do. And then when you're playing alone, the automatic recovery link will also not proc. So unless you are literally steamrolling people left and right, there just isn't much that this gear set can do for you. And if you're steamrolling people left and right with the Alpha Bridge, there is literally no reason you couldn't have done the same thing with Striker. Because at max stacks, it's going to give you more damage, more healing, and you can still use your signature skill manually or let it proc automatically when you're playing solo. Alpha Bridge, it seems fun for PvE, but honestly, it just doesn't seem that strong. For PvP, it really is more gimmick than anything else, which is why I put it on tier 4. FireCrest is another set that I probably will not be using in PvP. FireCrest used to be quite good in PvP because the fire turret would do an insane amount of damage if not dealt with correctly. But in patch 1.8, the developers nerfed the fire turret damage in PvP by 65%, meaning it will now only do 35% of the original damage to players. Needless to say, even when you max out the fire turret, the turret just isn't that big of a threat anymore. It still applies the on fire effect, you know, I'll give it that. But versus a good group, that should not be a factor really, because as I said, most groups are going to be running around with a Reclaimer. And even solo players have an immunizer most of the time due to the changes to the first aid, so yeah, there's that. But that's not all though, because the 6-piece also comes with a feature that makes it so that if you kill an enemy that's on fire, they will explode and leave this fire on the floor, like a fire grenade so to speak, on the place where they died. This sounds very useful, you know, if you kill one player, boom, everybody around them is set on fire and you can just keep killing more and more. But in reality, again, the on-kill mechanic in PvP isn't always as useful, especially not when you're playing FireCrest and when you have a lot of main stats spec'd into electronics to buff the fire turret, so you're definitely not going to get those finishing kills with that. And to top it all off, these fire explosions can also set yourself on fire, so if you ever get a kill within 10 meters from the target, boom, you're going to get punished by your own gear set. So yeah, I'm sorry FireCrest users, but this patch, it might be better to look for something else. Next up is the D3 or defense gear set, or whatever you want to call it, which is in my opinion one of the strongest sets in the game right now. Now I know there's been a lot of talk about the shield being too weak, and the fact that it gets shot down too fast, and I agree with this. This is true, but only for a normal shield, because when you're playing a fully min-maxed, properly built D3 build, I feel that this is not the case at all. I feel the shield is strong enough to tank a lot of players, especially if the shield is backed up by a Reclaimer healing that uses Overdose instead of the Defibrillator to heal up the shield through the overhealing mechanic. As soon as people even start shooting the shield, the whole team will very rapidly receive the 30% armor buff, which basically makes everybody in the team twice as tanky for 12 seconds, and this buff can also be refreshed if people continue shooting the shield. Needless to say, this buff is very, very strong. It allows your whole team to just go in and trade damage with 7 or 8 players and get a few kills out of it before the buff expires. If people keep shooting the shield, it's going to make you very, very difficult to kill. As far as I know, there are only 2 real counters to the shield build in the entire game, one of which is a Tactician Sticky Bomb build, because the Sticky Bomb can actually kill the shield without proccing the stamina buff, because the stamina buff only activates when taking bullet damage, not exotic damage, and since the D3 player is very immobile, it's actually not that hard to land the Sticky Bomb on him either. And then the second counter to a shield build is a lot of people running Striker, because the shield gives everybody free stacks. If you shoot the shield, you get your Striker stacks, and that damage that everybody then gets, that easily compensates for the armor buff that the whole squad gets. So if you notice a lot of people running with Striker, then it might be a good idea to change up the composition a little bit and get rid of D3. Still though, in the amount of situations and in the amount of fights that D3 is actually really, really good, it's insane. It basically wins fights for you because you get the feeling that you just can't die because of the armor buff. And then, for the very last gear set, we have Banshee. I find it quite funny actually that this is the set specifically made for the DZ. and then it's pretty weak in the DZ. I think Banshee's biggest appeal is probably the extra rewards that you can get, the extra loot when killing manhunts or when surviving manhunts, which not only applies to the player himself, but also to the whole team. So if you have one Banshee in the squad, everybody gets the Banshee benefits. But that's just rewards. And I'm not looking for rewards when I'm thinking about PvP. When it comes down to straight up fighting, I think Banshee lacks a lot of things. Sure, you get 45 or 55% extra damage versus manhunts rank 5 players. But honestly, guys, think about it. When does this ever become useful to you? Or when does this ever become more useful than a striker build with 100% striker stacks? Let me put it that way, because strikers gets more damage, but it also gets more healing. The damage from Banshee only applies to very specific targets. You're going to have to fight manhunts before you can really start to feel that damage increase. And the only time I would ever consider using Banshee over striker, for example, is when I'm getting checkpoint camped by a 4-man team. They're all rank 5 manhunts, they're right there in front of the checkpoint. I don't have time to stack up, but I just want to try to kill them. In that case, yeah, I could put on Banshee and then run and gun out until I get lucky enough to kill them. But honestly, in the 6 weeks that I've had Banshee ready in my loadout slot for this specific one scenario to use it versus those camping manhunts, I have not once been in that kind of situation. And even if I was, the manhunts usually wouldn't be right in front of the checkpoint. They would be a little bit further away, which meant that I could stack up from a distance on striker stacks before going in, which then resulted in more damage than Banshee could output, as well as some healing. Now, would I like to see the Banshee damage being boosted up? No, definitely not, because that would make the set very cheesy. It would be like Predator, where, oh, I can't kill these players that are camping me, let me put on Banshee, get 100% damage and just fold them over, right? That's not what I want Banshee to be. But what I'd like to see for Banshee is perhaps more group-wide buffs to manhunt teams that aren't just damage-orientated. The faster sell-off points is a nice start. The faster manhunt ranking is, I guess, good as well. Depending on how you look at it, it could be a disadvantage as well. But what I'd like to see is maybe add some kind of concealment to the manhunt so that you can't just see them on the map. Or give them 2 different buy-off points so they can go to 2 different places. They can't get camped as easily. Or give them a free permanent pulse without any crit chance or crit damage so that you can at least see other players coming far more easily. Utility type of buffs is what I would like to see for Banshee. That's what would make me want to run this in the team. But again, that's just my opinion, of course. If you put all of that together, then the list looks something like this. Again, to repeat myself and make myself very clear, just because something is tier 3 or tier 4, it does not mean that the set is useless. In fact, any of these gear sets can be very strong given the right conditions, especially in PvE. But for PvP, their use is going to be more limited than the use of the tier 1 and tier 2 gear sets. If you want to run Sentry or Alpha in PvP or FireCrest, hey man, go for it. I'm not stopping you. Just don't get upset when a few Nomads and Striker come along to ruin your day. That's all I'm saying. Anyway though, that's going to be all for today. As always, I will see you all later, or like they say in the Netherlands. See you later.